I knew I had lost Lucas, but I never imagined that just one day later, I would lose my home too. That morning Savannah was so cold it felt like the air itself could cut through bone. I stood in front of 214 Oak Ridge, a heavy canvas bag from the hospital weighing down my hand, my eyes red and swollen after 3 sleepless nights. Lucas had passed away at dawn, in a sterile ICU room drenched in white light. I thought that pain was the worst it could get. There I was, standing at my own front door, still wearing the same jeans I'd had on for 3 days, holding that hospital bag from Mercy Hill, the place where my husband Lucas had taken his final breath just 12 hours earlier. In my left hand, a wilted bouquet of white roses and asters from his coworkers drooped sadly after a night in the backseat of my car. My eyes burned, my lips were cracked. Every breath scraped my throat raw from too much crying, too little sleep. I wasn't ready to face the emptiness inside that house, but I never expected the blow waiting for me would cut deeper than death itself. The key slid into the lock, but no matter how hard I turned, it wouldn't budge. I pulled it out, tried again, nothing. A chill crept down my spine, not from the weather, but from a sickening sense of being unwelcome. My hands shook as I reached for the spare key hidden beneath the loose stone on the porch. Still no use. The door stood firm, silent, as if the house itself had forgotten I ever belonged there. Then I noticed it, small but sharp as ice. The white linen curtains I had painstakingly sewn myself were gone. In their place hung heavy, wine-colored velvet drapes, slack and suffocating, choking every window. My heart sank, weighted like stone. Peering through the narrow gap between curtain and glass, I caught my breath. The living room, once simple and neat, was now cluttered with unfamiliar moving boxes. Garish pink throw pillows were tossed onto my reading chair, the tea set on the coffee table, the one Lucas and I had saved for 3 years to afford, was being used without a second thought. And there she was, Margaret, my mother-in-law, in a slate-gray cardigan, smiling with a curl of disdain that made my skin crawl. Across from her, Vanessa, Lucas's sister, calmly folding throw blankets into a basket like this had always been their home. They laughed. They made themselves comfortable. Less than a day after Lucas died, I knocked. No response. I knocked again, harder, my fist trembling. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door cracked open. Margaret stood in the frame, her eyes sharp, as if she had been rehearsing this moment for years. "Oh, Evelyn!" She tilted her head, her voice syrupy sweet with ice beneath. "Didn't expect you back so soon. What's going on?" My teeth clenched, my throat dry. "Why won't my key work?" She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the picture of false composure. "Because, dear, you don't live here anymore." I froze. My lips parted, but no sound came out. My heart thundered, each beat pressing down like a vice. "Excuse me, what?" Margaret's smile never wavered. "Lucas paid for this house, my son, not you. No prenup, no children, no real contribution on your part. It's time this house returned to its real family." My fists clenched, but it wasn't the cold that made me tremble. "I'm his wife," I said, my voice low. "We bought this house together. I refinanced it when his business failed." "Oh, please." Margaret waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a gnat. "You played house while he worked. Now he's gone, your lease is up." Behind her, Vanessa appeared, holding 2 of my china plates, smirking. "You left the side door unlocked when you rushed to the hospital, remember? We figured you wouldn't mind." My knees nearly gave out. I laughed, not out of humor, but in that hollow, disbelieving way when reality twists too sharply to bear. "What do you think you're doing?" I said slowly, each word slicing the air. "You're redecorating a home you think belongs to you without the faintest idea what you've just walked into." For a fleeting second, Margaret's smile faltered. That was all I needed. I turned, walking steadily toward my car. The keys in my pocket might have been useless, but I had something far more powerful, something she had no idea existed. And when I was done, Margaret Pierce would wish she had never touched a single cup in my kitchen. I didn't drive straight to the motel after being thrown out of my own home. Instead, I let the roads of Savannah guide me, weaving through streets lined with ancient oaks whose branches arched overhead like silent witnesses. My car came to a stop in front of an old cafe on Abercorn Street, a place Lucas used to frequent when his company was collapsing. Back then, it was his refuge from reality. I would sit quietly beside him, tracing the cracks in the worn wooden table, while he wrestled with failure in silence. Now, I returned here not to escape, but to remember a truth Lucas himself never fully grasped. I was the one who saved that house, when he thought everything was lost. 3 years ago, Lucas's software company went under. Bank debts, unpaid suppliers, even his credit cards got frozen. I still remember that afternoon when he sat on our front steps, head bowed, his voice hoarse. "Evelyn, we might lose the house." What he didn't know was that the very next day I quietly went to North Point Bank. I used nearly a decade's worth of freelance savings to refinance the house, under my name. Lucas's pride was too fragile to ask why those mortgage confirmation letters started arriving addressed to me. He just knew we weren't evicted. And I stayed silent, not because I was afraid of embarrassing him, but because I understood the delicate ego of a man chasing a dream. And of course Margaret never knew. If she had, she would have weaponized it against Lucas at every family gathering, turning his failure into her favorite party anecdote. But now in the war Margaret so shamelessly declared, that old silence became my sharpest advantage. Leaving the cafe, my mind was set. That evening, I parked behind the tall fence bordering our backyard. Margaret would never venture there. She once called it a moldy waste of space. I slipped in the same way I always did, sliding my finger beneath the rusted iron latch until I heard the soft click of surrender. The house was still, like it was holding its breath for the storm to come. I headed straight for the small room at the end of the hallway. Lucas's office, or as Margaret once sneered, his tech junkyard. The room was untouched, chaotic in that oddly organized way Lucas liked. Tangled cables, half-finished wooden models, scattered sticky notes with his scribbled reminders. But here, I knew there was something Margaret would never think to look for. Beneath his desk drawer, hidden behind an old wooden calendar, I pulled out a worn brown leather briefcase. Inside were the financial documents I had carefully hidden since finalizing the refinance. The mortgage contract in my name, bank receipts all sealed and intact. But what truly stopped me was at the very bottom. An ivory envelope hastily labeled in Lucas's familiar handwriting. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there anymore. Don't let my mother take what's ours." My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a notarized copy of a postnuptial agreement, signed by both of us, witnessed and sealed. The document stated clearly, in the event of Lucas Pierce's death, all jointly owned assets, including real estate, shall be transferred to Evelyn Pierce as sole legal owner. Lucas never told me he'd done this. I never expected him to plan so meticulously. But maybe, deep down, he knew exactly how far his mother would go. And this was the key I needed. I gripped the document tightly. I couldn't tell if the heat rising in my chest was from tears or rage. Lucas was gone, but in his own quiet way, he was still standing beside me. Without hesitation, I slipped the folder into my bag, leaving the office without a trace. Just like 3 years ago, I would fight silently, but this time, I wouldn't stay silent. As I shut the door behind me, I knew Margaret had locked herself into a game she didn't even know the rules of. This battle, I had every card to win. I'm not someone who angers easily, but when I received the court summons from Margaret Pierce, I laughed. Not out of relief, out of disbelief. After everything she'd done? Changing locks? Invading my home? Using my wedding china like it was hers? Margaret still played the victim. The lawsuit, delivered from Chatham County Courthouse, stretched 12 pages long, accusing me of emotional manipulation, coercing Lucas into signing the postnup while he was mentally incapacitated. I thought I'd be furious, but no. What rose in me was the calm of someone who knows they're going to win. I called Amanda Walsh immediately, my real estate attorney and college friend. When I finished explaining, Amanda was silent for 3 seconds, long enough for me to hear her dry chuckle through the phone. "She's either delusional or thinks you're stupid, Evelyn," Amanda said coldly. "We're going to show her what it looks like to lose thoroughly." We had just 3 days to prepare. Margaret played her usual hand, spreading rumors, whispering to Lucas's old friends that I had pressured him during his financial downfall. Worse, she tried to collect vague statements from distant acquaintances, piecing together a false narrative that Lucas had shown signs of confusion. The problem was she had no proof. But I did. That evening I dug through stacks of old files and found exactly what I was looking for: a neurological assessment from Hartley Clinic. 3 months before Lucas passed, he had suffered dizziness, occasional forgetfulness. Concerned, he had gone for tests, hiding it from me because he didn't want me to worry. The result? Perfectly normal, no cognitive decline, no neurological disorders. When Amanda saw the report, she nodded. "That's all we need. Let's see what trick she thinks she has left." The day of the hearing, Savannah was drenched in a stubborn drizzle. I wore a slate gray suit, my hair pinned up, my gaze steady. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table, draped in theatrical black, clutching a silk handkerchief, flanked by Victor Langley, her family attorney, and Vanessa, ever avoiding my eyes. "She'll cry," Amanda muttered beside me, flipping through documents. "But tears don't beat legal contracts." The hearing began. Victor Langley opened with a tragic monologue, painting Lucas as a dutiful son crushed by the weight of his company's collapse, claiming that in his vulnerable state, Lucas had been emotionally manipulated into signing the postnuptial agreement. He carefully avoided the word coerced, but kept circling back to how vulnerable Lucas had been. I sat still, silent, because I knew this performance would only last until Amanda spoke. When it was her turn, Amanda stepped up to the podium, her smile sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, we do not deny that Mr. Lucas Pierce faced financial difficulties. However, the property in question, the very home being disputed, was entirely refinanced using personal funds from Mrs. Evelyn Pierce, who solely took on the mortgage and made every payment for 3 consecutive years." She paused, opened her file, and pulled out a medical report. More importantly, 3 months before Mr. Pierce's passing, he underwent a neurological assessment at Hartley Clinic. The results confirmed he was fully lucid, with no signs of cognitive decline. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. I glanced over at Margaret. Her face was drawn tight, lips pressed into a thin white line. Amanda took a step forward. The postnuptial agreement was signed at Grayson and Fielding Law Office in the presence of 2 independent legal witnesses. The document is notarized, fully valid and enforceable. Judge Carolyn Bates nodded, eyes scanning the file. "Mr. Langley, do you have any evidence contradicting Mr. Lucas Pierce's mental capacity at the time of signing?" Victor hesitated. Vanessa lowered her head. Margaret said nothing, but her hands clenched her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles turned white. "No, Your Honor," Victor finally muttered, barely audible. The gavel struck with a sharp crack. "This court recognizes the legality of the postnuptial agreement. Ownership of the disputed property is awarded to Mrs. Evelyn Pierce. Case dismissed." Margaret shot to her feet as the verdict was announced. Her glare burned into me, as if she could scorch me alive with sheer hatred. But this time, I didn't bow my head. I walked past her, slow, deliberate. "You think you've won?" she hissed as I passed. "That house might be yours on paper, but don't forget, Lucas was my blood." I stopped, tilted my head. "And your blood chose to protect me, not you. The paper only proves his choice." Margaret didn't reply. She stood there, rigid, as I strode out of the courthouse into the crisp, clear Savannah air after the rain. And I knew, this time, she had truly lost. Lucas's memorial service was held on a bright Saturday morning in March, as Savannah eased into its early spring. St. Matthew's Church, where Lucas once played guitar for the community choir, was now adorned with simple, pure white flowers. I kept the ceremony modest, exactly how Lucas would have wanted, no spectacle, no pretense. The guest list was carefully curated. Margaret and Vanessa Pierce were deliberately excluded. After everything they had done, their presence was no longer family. It would have been just another performance, one I would not allow at Lucas's farewell. But I knew they would come. Margaret Pierce never accepts losing control of the narrative. The idea of being sidelined from her son's final moments was something she could not stomach, even though she never truly listened to or understood who Lucas was. The service began at 10. Slowly the church filled with people who genuinely cared for Lucas. Friends, old co-workers, neighbors he'd helped fix fences for, familiar faces who carried no hidden agendas. I stood by the altar, beside the gray-blue urn. The very shade Lucas once said reminded him of the Charleston Ocean at sunrise. The air was solemn, gentle, but I felt it, that thorn pricking its way into my line of sight. And then I saw them. Margaret and Vanessa slipping quietly through the side entrance, settling into the third pew. Perfectly dressed in immaculate black, hair pinned, collars straight, with faint, insincere smiles of feigned grief. I drew in a slow breath. Amanda, ever the sentinel, caught my eye with a knowing glance. "Want me to handle this?" she murmured. I shook my head. No. This time, it would be me. As the organ softly played, I stepped down the central aisle. Every eye turned to watch, no whispers, no murmurs. Just a wall of quiet support. I stopped right in front of their pew. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word was precise, deliberate. "Margaret, Vanessa. Neither of you are on today's guest list." Vanessa lowered her head. Margaret, of course, remained unfazed. "Evelyn, today is about Lucas. Can't we put these petty things aside?" she said, wearing that soft smile. The same one that had fooled so many indifferent eyes before. I tilted my head slowly. "Petty things? You kicked me out of my own home. You smeared my husband's name with a lawsuit while his body was still warm, and you think I'll let you keep playing the role of the perfect mother here?" The air in the church seemed to freeze. No one laughed, no one whispered, just me and Margaret, two women facing each other with nothing left to hide. "I am Lucas' mother," she hissed. "And I am the family he chose," I shot back, locking eyes with her. "He signed those papers to protect that choice. You chose pride over love, Margaret. That's on you." Vanessa tightened her grip on Margaret's arm, whispering something I couldn't hear, but her eyes said enough. She was tired. Tired of holding up the perfect family facade Margaret clung to so desperately. "Let's go, Mom," Vanessa said, her voice weary but firm. "Lucas wouldn't want this." Margaret snapped her head toward her daughter, stunned. But Vanessa was already standing. She didn't look at me. She didn't glance back at the church. They left quietly. I stood still, watching Margaret's figure shrink past the pews, her heels clicking against the stone floor, each step echoing the sound of defeat. As I returned to the altar, something unexpected happened. Applause. Not loud, just a few scattered claps from those who truly knew Lucas, who knew this battle had never been fair. I didn't bow. I didn't smile in victory. I simply rested my hand on the gray urn and whispered, "I kept our home, Lucas." The service continued. But this time, no false faces sat among the crowd. After that day, I thought it would all be over. The court had ruled. Justice had spoken. Margaret and Vanessa had walked out of the church in silence. But I had forgotten one thing. Margaret Pierce doesn't lose easily. 3 days after the memorial, Savannah endured a steady, drizzling rain. I sat by the living room window, wrapped in Lucas's old wool blanket, absent-mindedly swirling my cup of cinnamon tea. Outside, raindrops tapped against the wooden eaves, playing a rhythm as familiar as breath. And then I saw it. A silver-gray Buick, Margaret's car, sat parked across the street, tucked beneath the large oak tree. Its shadow was just thick enough to hide in, but brazen enough to say, "I'm still here." She sat inside, lights off, engine off. Yet from the half-lowered window, thin threads of cigarette smoke curled into the air like a silent noose. No knocking, no text, no threats, just that shameless, slavish, relentless presence, like a stain that refused to fade. For the first time I found it amusing. I didn't call the police. I didn't pull the curtains. I didn't panic like the day Margaret stormed into my house with a lawsuit in hand. I simply stood up, stepped out onto the front porch, barefoot against the cold wooden boards, Lucas's cardigan draped loosely over my shoulders. We looked at each other, no words exchanged. In the quiet March rain of Savannah, we understood each other more clearly than ever. Margaret slowly crushed her cigarette into the ashtray, a gesture meant to provoke, to remind me she was still present, still capable of demanding attention. But this time her old tricks fell flat. I raised my cup, took a slow sip. Unbothered. Unrushed. Absolute calm. The way I stood there, not angry, not flinching, not afraid, was the loudest slap Margaret had ever received. She looked away first. The car engine rumbled to life, rolling slowly down the familiar street, away from the house she once believed belonged to the Pierce family. She didn't glance back. She didn't offer a parting shot. Just the fading growl of her retreating defeat. But I knew this wasn't surrender, it was a retreat of helplessness. That evening I sat in the living room for a long time. No Lucas beside me. No Margaret at my doorstep. Only the house itself. Silent. Intact. Truly mine. 3 days later, on a much clearer morning, an ivory envelope arrived. No sender. Inside was a small, neatly typed note. I may walk away, but that house will always bear the Pierce name. I laughed. A soft, bitterless laugh, without anger, because I understood. This was Margaret's final, pathetic move. She had poured all her bitterness into 6 meaningless words. I didn't call Amanda. I didn't react. Instead, I folded the note, carried it out to the backyard, to the spot where Lucas once sketched our marigold garden. I dug a small hole, buried the paper beneath the tender sprouts of young marigolds. Then, brushing the dirt from my hands, I lifted my head and breathed in the scent of damp earth and quiet rebirth. "This house," I whispered, "belongs to those who cherish it, and that's not you." That was the last time I ever heard from Margaret Pierce. No more lawsuits, no more cars parked across the street, no more veiled threats. She vanished from my world like a shadow that finally understood it had lost. But this time, I wasn't waiting to defend myself anymore. This time, I had locked that door from the inside. They say storms always pass, but no one ever teaches you that the hardest part isn't standing up after the storm. It's learning how to live afterward. The house on Oak Ridge came back to me, quietly, without fanfare. But it wasn't the place I used to know. Lucas was gone, the scratches on the table, the squeaky hinges, even the silence between the walls. All of it still echoed with his presence. Some mornings I asked myself, what am I really holding on to here? Memories? Or just stubbornness? And then I found his old notebook buried deep in the drawer where he kept unfinished sketches. The leather cover was worn, the paper edges curled, but his handwriting remained clear. "Evelyn, one day this garden will be greener." I had forgotten that dream of his. The next morning, I went to the garden. The patch of land behind the house, once dismissed by Margaret as a useless, moldy lot, now lay bare. Brown earth, weeds, and scattered paw prints from stray cats. But to me, it was the last place Lucas still existed. I started small, breaking up the hardened soil, pulling out old, stubborn weeds. My hands bled from thorns, nails caked with dirt, shoulders aching by the end of each afternoon. But that pain was far gentler than courtrooms, contemptuous stares, or Margaret's endless threat. Row by row, I replanted marigolds, right where Lucas had once marked in his scribbles, "Best morning sunlight here." I added lavender, rosemary, even clusters of white asters. The kinds of flowers Lucas said had to smell like memories to be worth keeping. Soon enough, the barren patch of land began to turn green again. Not the green of the past, but the green of things I had planted with my own hands. In those days of kneeling in the dirt, I realized what I needed wasn't victory over Margaret. What I truly needed was to live decently in a world of my own making. One late afternoon, as golden light spilled across the ground, my phone rang. On the other end was Clara Wilkins, a former client from my interior design days. "Evelyn, I heard you're back," she said, her voice hesitant, like someone searching for a lifeline. I need help. My living room. It's still exactly the same as when Mr. Wilkins passed. Could you help me make it feel lighter again?" That invitation, simple as it seemed, was the turning point that pulled me out of waiting for something to happen. I said yes. From Clara's home, the work started flowing back to me naturally, no longer grand, lavish projects, but women like me, women struggling to reclaim their own space after losing so much. A young widow wanting to erase the traces of an abusive marriage. A single mother needing to turn a cramped kitchen into a warm haven for her 2 children. An elderly couple hoping to make their bedroom feel less empty with just one of us left. They came without knowing my story, but in their eyes I saw reflections of who I once was. I worked like I was tending a garden. Carefully, slowly, no longer trying to satisfy hollow expectations. I picked soft, forgiving colors, adjusted lighting just enough, chose curtains simple yet gentle. Anything that made breathing easier each morning. One client once told me, "The space you created makes me feel allowed to let go." I smiled, because I understood that feeling more than anyone. Lucas used to say, "Designing isn't about making your room pretty, it's about giving people back a part of themselves they thought was lost." Only now do I truly understand what he meant. Every time I returned from a project, I would spend time in the small garden behind my house. The marigolds were in full golden bloom, lavender scent mingling in the breeze, while I sat on the wooden bench Lucas once promised to fix, now restored by my own hands. No more Margaret, no more venomous whispers, no more anonymous letters. Me, the garden, and a peace not everyone has the courage to protect. That afternoon, as the sunset poured honey over the petals, I whispered, "I've lived well, Lucas, not because I defeated anyone, but because I'm finally living for myself." The wind rustled through the trees, brushing against the wind chimes on the porch, singing a sweet, familiar tune. That year, spring came early to Savannah. The marigolds in my garden burst into vibrant clusters of gold, spreading warmth over the grass. Just like Lucas had once imagined, a garden that heals. I think I've finally learned how to breathe slower. No longer flinching at unexpected doorbells. No longer scrolling through emails dreading venomous words. The nightmares of Margaret grew sparse, fading as her presence did. One morning, as I trimmed the lavender along the path, the familiar sound of the mailman echoed at the gate. Nothing unusual, just a pale cream envelope, no postmark, no sender. But the neat handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Vanessa Pierce. I hesitated for a moment. Anything bearing the Pierce name always came with hidden blades beneath a polished surface. But I was no longer the woman who flinched away. I opened the letter. "Evelyn, I'm not sure if I have the right to write this. You might tear it up immediately and I wouldn't blame you. I want to apologize, not the hollow kind my mother used to offer after every family dinner. I stayed silent when she invaded your home, when she slandered you in court. I watched it all, and I stayed silent because I was weak. Lucas was more of a support to me than my mother ever was, but I let her twist that weakness into a weapon against you. I know I can't undo what's been done, but I want to thank you. Thank you for protecting Lucas from my mother's toxic hold. Thank you for keeping that house, not as a trophy, but as a piece of him. If someday you no longer hate me, I'd like to sit with you in the garden Lucas once dreamed of. Vanessa." I folded the letter, my fingers lingering on the last line. Not all wounds need an apology to heal. But some words, even late ones, are a sign you've walked the right path. My victory wasn't the court ruling, nor watching Margaret retreat when faced with undeniable evidence. The true triumph was this moment. Standing in my sunlit garden, head held high, knowing my presence had never and would never be erased. I was no longer the woman who kept silent for the sake of peace. No longer the shadow at the end of a family dinner table, smiling through invisible wounds. Margaret once thought she could erase me from Lucas's life with a few words, a few court papers, and a locked door. What she never expected was that Lucas had chosen me, long ago. With every brushstroke of that dream garden, with every quiet legal document, and by putting the house in my name even without saying it aloud, I no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. That afternoon, I personally removed the old wooden sign at the front gate, the one still faintly etched with the Pierce family residence. I replaced it with a smaller, simpler sign, Evelyn's Garden. No grand gestures, no need for the Pierce family's approval. Just a quiet, firm statement. This place is mine, this story is mine. That evening, sitting on the wooden bench beneath the maple tree, the breeze wove through the leaves, carrying the rich scent of marigolds and lavender. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't need Margaret's acknowledgement. Her prolonged silence was the clearest answer of all. I didn't win by taking something from her, I won by not letting her take what was rightfully mine. That night, before bed, I tucked Vanessa's letter into the back of Lucas's old notebook, to remember that I had weathered the storm, not with vengeance, but by planting my roots deep in this very soil. I had replanted myself from things that once seemed dead. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone touch that piece again. Evelyn's story isn't just about reclaiming a house. It's about reclaiming her worth after being so easily dismissed. Amid manipulation, betrayal, and loss, she chose to rise not out of spite, but with quiet, unwavering strength. Her greatest victory wasn't in court, it was in living peacefully in a space she built for herself. A reminder, no one can erase your presence unless you let them. What do you think of Evelyn's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful stories about family, resilience, and finding your true self.